Welcome to Promote, Profit, Publish. I'm your host, Juliette Clark, and today we're going to talk about year-end trends and audiobooks. And for those of you who haven't done an audiobook, it's time you start thinking about it. So before we get started, I want to send you over to take our Promote, Profit, Publish quiz. You can find it at www.promoteprofitpublishquiz.com. You may not be ready. You may have that book written and you think you're ready to publish, but if you haven't been building a platform and you don't know how you're going to publish, where you're going to publish, what different models you're going to use, then you're not ready. So find out over there if you're ready. And then for those of you who like to see this over on YouTube, jump over to Super Brand Publishing, subscribe over there. All of these, if you're a podcast listener, you'll see them over there and you can see all of these people in person, see they're credible. I just don't pick up homeless people off the street and pretend. Not that anybody else does, but anyway, you can see they're real people. So today's guest is Tina Dietz, and Tina's been on here before. You probably, if you're an avid listener, you probably listened to her in the summer of 2020 because we were pushing Pod to Publish back then. Pod to Publish back then. Tina is an award-winning and internationally acclaimed speaker, audiobook publisher, podcast producer, and a vocal leadership expert who has been featured on media outlets including ABC, Inc.com, Huffington Post, and Forbes. Tina's first podcast, The Start Something Show, was named by Inc. magazine as one of the top 35 podcasts for entrepreneurs. In 2016, Tina was the recipient of the Evolutionary Business Council More Award. And in 2017, she received an award for Outstanding Audio Company from the Winner's Circle. She's also a member of the EBC Leadership Body and a founding member of the Forbes Coaches Council. Tina was also the lead interviewer in the podcasting documentary, The Messengers, and featured in the film. Tina splits her time between the US and Costa Rica, where she's part of a leadership team building a community of conscious leaders called Vista Mundo. So welcome.
Thanks, Juliette. I'm really happy to be back.
That is so funny. The Forbes Coaches Council, we have a book coming out soon that is from one of the members of that as well.
That does not surprise me.
So I wanted to talk about this today because there are so many publishing trends that are pointing to the need for an audiobook now. Yeah. And so you guys, some of the trends that have come up in the last year, hardcovers are up 24%, trade paperback to 17%, mass market 5%, and the QB board books are up 20%. Those are children's books. But authors are looking for multiple platforms, and audiobooks are fantastic.
They sure are. It's one of the best ways to get your book out there into new markets, for sure.
Yeah, it really is. So tell us about, where are people listening to these? You and I talked about this a little before the show. I do it when I exercise, but where is most of America consuming these?
Well, the vast majority of people do listen to audiobooks in their vehicles. They're on commutes. And when they're out shopping, when they're out on drives, on road trips and things like that. The other places folks listen to, well, certainly subways and bus trips and all of that as well. And of course, they're doing it generally while they're doing something else. Exercise, that's my primary way of listening to audiobooks as well. There's a lot of people who listen while they're knitting. There's actually an entire knitting podcast all around being read and talking about audiobooks, as a matter of fact.
Really?
Truckers. Yeah, and going back to the transportation side of things, Uber drivers and long distance truckers consume tremendous numbers of audiobooks as well. But even the folks who are basically sitting and waiting for their child to be done with soccer practice or a dance lesson or cello practice, a lot of times you'll see folks with earbuds in and they are listening to an audiobook. So it's become very, very ubiquitous across the board, all the way young children, all the way through older adults, because it is so accessible.
Yeah, I actually remember being at a soccer game when 50 Shades of Grey came out and none of the moms were clapping. And I was listening to 50 Shades of Grey. They were reading it on the Kindle and I kind of leaned over and I'm like, hey, what you guys reading? And they're like, shh. I was like, you should do it on Audible because then you could actually watch the game and clap for your kids. But they
That's
were like,
hilarious.
everybody was silent as the kids were scoring. It was kind of wild. So audiobooks, when we're talking about it, like people are now looking at their backlist books as well to get a second wind on them. Are you guys doing a lot of that?
Yeah, we always have, as a matter of fact. It's one of the two big places that folks come to us for audiobooks. It's to give the book new life. It's been out for a year, 2 years, 5 years. And now it's time to revitalize that book, give it new wings, give it new life. Sometimes the material is evergreen and it just stands on its own and it just needs a second wind. And sometimes they want to do a second edition and refresh the content a little bit. And the audiobook is a great way to kind of get that out there to new audiences and basically have an excuse and create a different level of product so that it can live again. I mean, you and I, and all of us in the publishing industry who hang out, Juliet, we know that the biggest problem that authors have is getting fatigue of marketing and talking about the same things over and over again. But that's exactly what it takes to have your book and your platform be successful. It's exactly what it takes. You have to keep falling in love with your work over and over and over again. Audiobooks kind of help doing that.
Yeah. And you know what the nice part is when we self-publish a book, our authors have to look at it over and over and over. And they literally tell me before it goes to print, like, I am sick of this. So
sure.
Yeah, the audiobooks are a great way to push it forward and market it at a different time without having to read it again.
That is very true. Very true. Or if they are listening to their audiobook, they have a very different experience of their book than if they read it 10 times. We hear that pretty much every single time from our authors.
Mm-hmm. So one of the things that has happened in the past is we've had authors who, while we're publishing their book, they will bring me an audio version that they've done themselves. And I immediately have to tell them that will never stand up to the standards. Can you talk a little bit about why it's so important to have the producer? You guys give people, is it a producer or director? I forget.
We act as both. We act as both. So in terms of author narration, which is something we have a deep specialty and we're known for, because we focus on nonfiction books, we focus on folks who are subject matter experts who are looking to build authority. And we do probably 70% of our audiobooks is author narrated and about 30% of our books are professionally narrated. We love doing both. And sometimes we even do hybrids of the two, depending on what's best for the author. And that's really part of the process. But what you're talking about, this whole technical process of recording an audiobook, audiobooks are extremely picky. And so about once a month, we get files from an outside author or one of our publisher partners coming to us saying, hey, could you take a look at these files? Mm-hmm. And I can count on one hand over the years how many files have actually been ready to go for publishing, even if they've been produced at a professional studio. Because if that professional studio doesn't know how to get your book out onto Audible, they probably don't know how to record an audiobook because the standards are extremely picky and they do change from time to time as well. So all of those technical specs, from the way your software is set up to the room noise that's available to, and not all this can be fixed in post-production either. Not all of it can be fixed without you sounding mechanical if we have to over filter your voice, and that doesn't make for a good audiobook. So it's really crucial to make sure that whoever you're working with to produce your audiobook, first of all, never go it alone unless you are an audio professional yourself. Secondly, you always want to make sure that your technical specs are set up, your software, you want to have it checked by somebody who knows what they're doing before you start recording. And thirdly, it's also very challenging to record your audiobook on your own when you're speaking into an empty room. There's a humanity that comes through our voices and an interaction that comes through our voices when we are speaking to somebody else. And it creates that intimacy that we're looking for. Now, trained narrators have the ability to do that in a room by themselves because that's what they've spent many hundreds of hours doing and training for. But most of our authors that we work with, even if they have hundreds and hundreds of thousands of hours of public speaking experience or podcasting experience, they find that narrating is an extremely different animal because it requires different pacing, different breathing. You are reading at the same time as you're performing. Most other places you are not doing that. And you are, again, having the technical aspect of making sure that things are correct. So all of that put together really means that if you're going to narrate yourself, you do want to have professional help.
Absolutely. I tried this once, very long time ago, and big things that came up, I was huffing. Mm-hmm. It's something you hear and you can't get rid of that huffing, and people don't even realize it. It's a breath thing. And the other thing is voice actors, they actually practice breathing and speaking.
Yeah.
Well, and I know that sounds odd, like, what do you mean? I breathe and speak all the time. But when you're actually reading a sentence, you get going, and then, the pacing isn't right, or your breath isn't there, and you speed up, and your voice has to be consistent for mood as well. And when you're doing this day to day, people can hear the mood in your voice, can't they?
Oh, yes, completely. That's one of the things our directors listen for is consistency. So if you show up one day at 10 a.m. and you've had orange juice and coffee and you're full of phlegm, your voice is going to sound very different than if you're recording at 5 p.m. at the end of the day after being on 15 phone calls, which is going to be very different than if you are coming in after a yoga class completely relaxed with kind of nothing else on your plate. It's that consistency that we're looking for. And it is quite literally an embodiment exercise to bring your voice into a place of your very best self and speaking and narrating from this place of being your best self. And our narrators take that burden off of it because we reflect back to them, hey, your energy is starting to ebb and it's not going to match. So why don't we call it for the day? And then we'll start recording, tomorrow, or let's look at our next piece of our schedule. Because even professional narrators don't tend to narrate for more than 2 hours at a time. So when we're doing recording sessions, we often will get a busy entrepreneur or professor like, let's bang this out in a day. It's like, nope, we're not going to be banging anything out. First of all, this needs to be a really good performance. There's only been one, maybe two author narrators that we've ever worked with that have had the stamina to go longer than a 2-hour session. And all of them had a background in professional singing and or other kind of vocal training beyond public speaking.
Very interesting.
Yeah.
So some reasons why people should do this audiobook. I know right now the trends are that authors really want to be able to hold on to their rights. And the way you guys do this, they're able to hold on to the rights to their book. Is that correct?
Yeah, absolutely. We don't take any rights or royalties from our authors. We want them to be able to do what they want with it. And we also partner with a lot of independent, hybrid, and traditional publishers. And that allows us to be fluid in how we partner with folks and create solutions that work for everybody.
Yeah, that's same with us. We don't take any of the royalties of the book rights as well. Why is that important? For you guys are probably like, wow, why is that important? It's important because for many of you who listen to this show, you also have programs, products, and services that are wound into that. And you could actually get yourself in a quandary where you can't produce a program because it's the book and somebody else owns the rights to those books. So pretty important there. Expansive distribution. People are looking for expansive distribution. So should they be partnering that audiobook with an ebook, a regular soft cover? What are your thoughts on that? Do you recommend they have all of those?
I do recommend that you have multiple formats of your book. Generally we're not producing an audiobook unless there are other versions of the book. The other versions of the book usually come out first. It's even a little bit challenging with the way that the audiobook industry works to get a simultaneous release of an audiobook with other versions, but that is not a problem. It's an opportunity. So what we coach our authors to do is to stagger their launch, and the traditional publishing industry has been doing this for decades. And so to keep the interest going and to extend the life of the launch, the audiobook is generally, we launch anywhere from 2 weeks to 6 months, or in the case of repurposing books into audiobooks later on, it could be a number of years later. But if you're making it part of your book launch, we're not even really that interested in it coming out exactly the same day as your other versions, unless there is a major media push you have behind your book. And in campaigns like that, we always work that out with the publisher and the author to make sure that the timing works.
Yeah, and we actually recommend that as well. We usually release the Kindle soft cover and then recommend 3 to 6 months later, so you can get that second push on the promotion of it as well. So yeah, really great. You already mentioned the multi-format strategies. People are also doing it for availability and discoverability. So can you talk a little bit about that?
Yeah, of course. Yeah. So Audible is the largest publisher of audiobooks in the world. They have about 60% of the market share, and Audible and Amazon are basically the same company. So when your audiobook shows up on Audible, it also shows up generally alongside of your other versions of your book on Amazon. And so there's a nice fluidity between those two platforms that allows for discoverability. So there's another search platform for you. Audible is another search platform for you. And then if you want to go further than that, your audiobook can be distributed out onto 30 to 40 other audiobook platforms, none of which is as large, but there's still that discoverability factor, and there are other countries. So for example, audiobooks.com is much bigger in Canada, and I believe Kobo actually does more business in Canada around audiobooks than they do in the US. So there is that discoverability factors with other, particularly English-speaking countries, that you find on some of these smaller audiobook platforms. And again, it comes back to marketing as well. So, if you distribute exclusively on Audible for your few months, and then you go to non-exclusive and we get you out on the 30 to 40 more platforms, well, guess what? In your content marketing and your social media, on podcast interviews that you're in, well, you can say, oh, we're on 30 different audiobook platforms. And you can post about that saying, oh, guess what? We're on Kobo now. We're on Downpour. We're on Scribd. We're on all these different places. And that also increases this perception that you and your brand and your message are everywhere.
Very much so. Here's what I loved about our clients that have used Tina. We are one of the few companies out there who actually give you your Author Central account. So what that means is we don't take those royalties. It goes straight to you from Amazon. The clients that we've had, Tina has actually been able to load right into those accounts, which means now you can run ads on them as well. Yes. So that is something that most other publishers don't give you the ability to do. So working with both of us in tandem on this allows you to be able to control where the flow of your ads go on this as well. If you don't have the Author Central account, if you go with a publisher that doesn't allow you to control that dashboard, you can't run ads on your book. So it really is a coordinated strategy that puts the author in control of where they want to spend their dollars, what they want to do, how they want to do it. And that is really, really important, you guys, when especially since you're going to be owning the rights on everything. Use it to your best advantage. Where can we find you if we want to find out more about audiobooks? And more than anything, whether you think the book, you evaluate every single book,
yes, we do.
Every single book, and the voice if they want to read it themselves. And you guys, she's super honest about it. We have an author who had a great voice. We have an author who, she was a doctor and she didn't have the time or the voice for it. So if people want everything evaluated, where do they get a hold of you at?
You can just reach out to us at twinflamesstudios.com and just contact us through our contact page. And we'll make a request for you to send us a PDF of your book, which we keep in the strictest confidence. I'm a former therapist, so all that ethical confidentiality is baked into me and baked into our company. And then you can talk with me. You can also talk with our head of our audiobooks, Stephen George, and we'll walk you through your options and what's going to be good for you. If you want to narrate your own book, we'll listen to your voice. We'll ask you some questions to see if it's a good fit for you. And I would love to make a point about that. Do we have one more minute?
Oh, yeah,
this
absolutely.
is so important, what I want all my author narrators to know. So if you're thinking about narrating your own book and you go out to your community and you ask them, should I narrate my own book? What do you think they're going to say?
Probably yes.
Yes, right? Anybody who loves and supports you is going to say this type of thing. It's your story. It's your message. You have to do it. Your voice is unique. That is what they're going to tell you. I want you to be thinking about, though, when you think about doing your audiobook, being open past those people who are your fans and being open to what the industry is going to tell you, and be open to what is going to be the best pathway forward for your book, going to be the best pathway forward for your time, because it is a time-consuming process, and we will make you sound like phenomenal, but we can't always do that 100% of the time. So we are going to be honest with you about your best pathway forward. And if a hybrid version of your book is going to be better, or a professionally narrated book of your version is going to be better, we are going to guide you in the right direction.
Yeah. Could you just go over briefly, when you say a hybrid, are you meaning like you read your foreword, somebody else reads the book? I think I've seen some of those out there.
Yeah. I lovingly refer to this as a Tony Robbins sandwich, because Tony did all of his audiobooks that way, although they picked a narrator for him that had absolutely nothing in common with him, and I never understood that. So we have certain circumstances where it just works better for the author either to do, say, the introduction and the conclusion, and we usually create a little context around why they picked having a narrator do the rest of the book. There's a little bit of personal content in there. Sometimes we do what's called a interview with the author bonus chapter, and that's where the book is professionally narrated, but then there is a 15-minute bonus kind of interview conversation with the author at the end. And that really helps the author. We have an author right now who is incredibly energetic, and he speaks so fast. There's no way he could be a narrator for his book. We tried to slow him down, just didn't work. And he finally said, you know what, you guys are right. Let's do this a different way. But he's great on podcast interviews. He's wonderful being off the cuff. So it's a great combination for him. And we're finding him a narrator that has that energy and has that enthusiasm and gravitas that he has, but is going to be able to narrate the book in a way that people can actually absorb without being overwhelmed by the speed.
So I have a question about that. I think I mentioned last time we talked that I very long time ago, I was listening to a Jackie Collins book, and she got on and she started narrating one of her characters, and she had a horrendous lisp. And it was just so distracting. When you were talking about the Tony Robbins book, you said, I don't know why he chose that person. Isn't it really important to choose someone that people expect, that's in alignment with the book? Because that
I really feel strongly about this. So a lot of traditional publishers who take over the audiobook process, and I will say that it's less common now than it used to be, but a lot of traditional publishing, when somebody has signed their audio rights away and their audio is being produced, oftentimes without the author even knowing about it, there's no creative purview from the author, and there's no consideration for a good energy match between the author and the narrator. And so we feel very strongly that when we work with narrators, that the narrator needs to be able to embody some of those key vocal characteristics that the author has, and also needs to be believable. So we even vet our narrators when we're looking for somebody to say, do you have a background in this material? How are you relating to this personally? It's a really important audition process that we go through. And we generally get about 200 auditions per book, and we curate that down to about 6 to 10 of our top picks to help the author make those creative choices. But the creative choice is always ultimately up to the author. They have to be comfortable.
Yeah, and I remember I would say probably 2015, I interviewed Dory Clark when I had the podcast Ask Juliet. And she did not know exactly what you talked about. She didn't know that she signed away her first book. And when I listened to the book, it didn't match her. And I asked her about it. Of course, she's not going to say, well, this happened and, damn them for signing them away. But when she read her second book on her, it was so much more intimate and so much more believable and just really in alignment with what she was teaching, that it makes a huge difference, you guys. It really, really does when you're listening. And yeah, so great. This has been amazing. I hope you guys got a lot of information out of this. Tina told you guys where to find her, and think about when you're over there taking that quiz and you're thinking about, how am I going to release the book? How am I going to put my budget together for a multi-platform, launch? She's someone you definitely need to talk to find out, what is that audio piece? What does that usually run? And have them evaluate the book and really give you some feedback. So thank you. This was great.
Thank you, Julie. I really appreciate you having me on. It's really good to be back.